Alrighty then, I'm in beautiful Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm hiding under a bridge because it's so damn miserable out there. I'm on the banks of the Merrimack River. Take a look. These are the old mills of the Industrial Revolution. I'm here to talk about something that's not related to this in any way. I'm talking about secrecy, and I'm here to defend secrecy. Now this is kind of strange for me because back in the 1990s I was an anti-secrecy activist at Area 51, and I was arguing to open up the secret base at Area 51. Now I'm taking the opposite tack. I'm talking to you today in defense of secrecy, how we can't live without secrecy. It's part of our society. Society is built on a delicate web of withheld information. And if you sabotage that web, if you take away our right to secrecy, you take away the very underpinnings of society. Virtually all of our activities depend on some way on secrecy, on keeping discretion. Many of our activities, most of our activities throughout our life are adversarial activities, meaning we're in a competition of some kind with someone else, be it in business or romance or even raising children. There's an adversarial relationship involved. There's a competition involved. There's a game of chess that's involved. Even with, let's start with something simple. Start with raising children. You know full well when you raise children, you're not going to tell them everything. You're going to tell them what they can understand, what they can reasonably deal with about the world. When they're very young, you just feed them fairy tales. As they get older, you tell them more and more about the world, but you're not going to talk about the problems in your marriage with your 5-year-old. There are things that they just can't handle and that they shouldn't handle, and you as the responsible party have to filter the world into something that they can understand. So yes, we're keeping secrets from our children, but that's our job as parents, is to give them the information they can deal with and protect them from the information that's damaging to them that they can't deal with. If you're not doing that, then you're not a responsible parent. Let's fast forward to adulthood. You're in a business transaction with someone. You want to sell them something. You want to sell them a product that you make. Are you going to tell them every little detail that goes into the making of the product? Are you going to tell them everything that you had to go through to present this product to them? Are you going to tell them about the competition? Are you going to tell them that you can go down the street? Why buy the product from me when you go down the street and buy it from someone else? That's not what you do in business. That's the customer's job, is to find these things out. And the customer really doesn't need to know everything that's going on in your life. If a customer walks in your door and they're morbidly obese, they're huge people, you're not going to blurt out to them, "Oh my God, you're so fat, you need to go on a diet." That's not your job, that's not your position. Your position is to provide them with whatever product you're selling. Everything that goes on in the world is a negotiation. And when you're engaged in negotiation, there are things that you tell other people and things that you keep to yourself. And it's not lying. It's not lying to keep these things to yourself. When you don't tell children about your marital problems, you're not lying to them. You're simply withholding information that isn't relevant to them, that they can't handle, and that may be damaging to them. And that's true with every other relationship as well. When you're engaged in a negotiation, which you're often doing, you have to be honest, but you don't have to tell the person you're negotiating with every detail of your personal life. You don't have to tell them exactly what someone else told them, because people have ego, and you don't want to set their ego off. Now, the reason I'm talking about secrecy right now is in the news we have something called WikiLeaks, where a website is releasing diplomatic correspondence from the US government, thousands of documents of diplomatic correspondence. And really there's nothing in them that you wouldn't expect. A typical diplomatic cable is one diplomat advising the other diplomat, okay, you've got to go careful. This is what you need to know about this leader. Okay, this leader is very sensitive about one thing or another. This leader likes to dance. I mean, this is all kind of background information. Well, everything we've seen in these things is background information. But it's not information you want released to the public. If I talk to a friend about some problem that they have, I assume that they're not going to put it on the internet. That's what friends do. Friends respect discretion, and you have to have that ability to talk to people in confidence just to work out your problems. I like to say, if you want to come up to, you have a difficult problem and you want to come up with a reasonable, workable solution to that problem, you've got to be able to consider unreasonable and unworkable solutions to that problem. You've got to consider extreme solutions to that problem. And when you discuss those solutions with a confidant, you expect that that's not going to be leaked out, because that, at this point, is not relevant. When you negotiate with someone and you finally come to a conclusion, that action is public. But all the discussions, all the internal discussions, all of the doubts, all of the absurd hypotheses that you come up with, that is secret, and it has to be secret. Otherwise, you're not free to be creative. You're not free to consider all circumstances. So I'm defending secrecy. I'm defending the ability of individuals and organizations to keep their deliberations to themselves, at least during the time that these negotiations are going on. I find it absurd, I find it deeply offensive to see WikiLeaks releasing internal cables that are just this sort of background information, that are just this sort of, hypothesizing that everyone has to do. Now, secrecy doesn't last long. It's not like everything is going to be secret forever. Everything will be known. When you die, if you leave records behind, everything will be known. If you're a celebrity, you've got to figure that everything you do will eventually end up in a book sometime. Everything will be known eventually, and you've got to conduct your actions in such a way that you'll be proud of your record in the end. If you're the President of the United States, you know that everything that you do, while it is confidential today, will eventually go into your presidential library, and people will be able to poke around and view your decisions and whether you made the right choice. That's okay. Ultimately, everything will be open. But for now, while negotiations are going on, there's nothing more dangerous than revealing the internal discussions of diplomats. If you're in a negotiation with a company to provide a business service, you are not obligated to open up everything that you're discussing. Here's a good example. Here's a good way to phrase it. In law, let's say we were involved in a criminal case. In law, each side is obligated to give the other side any evidence that they have. So if I'm prosecuting somebody for a murder, and I have certain evidence that may clear them of that murder, I am obligated to give that evidence to the defense. In fact, all evidence that I have is obligated to be given to the defense. That's called discovery. However, there's certain documents and certain information that is not discoverable, that is not available to the other side. And that's what you call, I can recall it, the work product. Okay? There's something called the work product rule. meaning that, yes, you're obligated to turn over every bit of evidence, but you're not obligated to turn over your internal discussions, say between the client, the defendant, and his lawyer. That information, those internal discussions that take place in the lawyer's office, or that are the product, what they call work product, meaning the product of work, that is not discoverable. That you do not have to turn over to the other side. We can carry this analogy to real life. When you make a decision, that decision is public. But how you arrive at that decision, who you ask to advise you on that decision, what you look up on the internet while researching that decision, that is private. That is your discretion. And it's just like what's in your head. What's in your head is private. It's not open to anyone. And that is your most inviolable right, is to be able to think your own thoughts, because they could be absurd thoughts. The important thing is what you actually do in the end, not your thoughts that you go on in your head. I reserve the right to keep what's in my head in my head. What happens in my head stays in my head. And that is my discretion. I can tell people if I choose what's going on in my head, but I don't have the obligation, and I would strongly object to any sort of technology that is going to intrude into my head. The same thing with diplomats. The diplomats, when they make a decision, a public decision about how to treat a country, how to treat a leader, that's public. How they arrive at that decision, the discussions they have amongst themselves about how to deal with that leader, that is private, and it is grossly offensive to see someone release that information. Aside from national security. National security doesn't seem to have any play in the recent diplomatic WikiLeaks thing. It's all about anarchy, basically. There are people who believe that all information should be free, no matter what it is, that openness, everything should be open. That is just not possible in human society. Because you make this information open, suddenly you're going to have to please everyone. Suddenly you're going to be accountable not just for the things you do, but for the things you think. It just doesn't work in real society. Mainly because people have egos, and you don't want to trip over their egos. You don't want to tell the fat lady she's fat if you want to sell her something else. If you want to sell her a loaf of bread, it's not your place to tell the fat lady she's fat. You want to talk about the bread, not about things that aren't relevant to the transaction. So, this has nothing to do with Lowell, Mass. I've said all I need to say about secrecy. Everything will be secret eventually, but in the meantime, while transactions are taking place, you and I and the U.S. government and every organization have a right to keep their deliberations secret. Let's take a look at Lowell, Mass. I'm under a bridge. And that is actually the city of Lowell. Believe it or not, that building over there that I just looked at, I used to work in that building. That building is called Boot Mills. Try to get a little bit better view of it. Boot Mills. It's a very historic building. It's one of these sweatshops from the industrial age, industrial revolution. But back in the about 1980, in 1980, I worked in a factory on the ground floor of this building back here. See if I can got it behind me. That building, there, yes. I worked on the ground floor of that building packaging plastic cups for the Mobile Chemical Corporation. So I worked a night shift. It was a 12-hour shift, I think 3 or 4 days a week. I worked a night shift. We had cups coming down a conveyor. My job was to, these are plastic drinking cups like you might use at a cocktail reception. Disposable plastic drinking cups. They came down a chute from the machine that made them. It was a very noisy environment. My job was to turn a stack of these plastic cups over on a light machine to find defects in the cups. So about 1 in every 10 cups had a crack in it. So my job was to take the cracks out and throw the bad cups away. So it was a cool job, frankly. It was factory work, 12 hours a day. I was the only one in the factory who wore earplugs, so I was the only one who preserved my hearing. But it gave me a lot of time to think back then, and I needed the time to think. I worked 3 or 4 days a week, and then I would at 12 hours a day, and I'd have 3 or 4 days off. I could go and explore. So actually, it was an interesting time in my life. I was trying to get my life together, trying to decide what I wanted to do. And this factory behind me gave me an opportunity to do that. And I wasn't even thinking of that when I came under this bridge. I forgot all about it until I started talking. I used to work on the ground floor of that building over there. Signing off.